is simply to give a very high-level view of why you should care about gender and talk from a high level about the kinds of problems that might come up when working on robots. That's my goal. So I'm going to start with a thought experiment. Very easy one, don't worry. Not even really a thought experiment. So let's imagine this scenario. You just came back from a conference in Beijing. You stayed in some local place, did some grocery shopping. You said, hey, I see an opportunity here. I found it hard, and I think the locals find it hard to find groceries. I have this amazing idea for an app to help locals find groceries. Imagine you're Canadian like me. You go home, and you compile a team of people to help you make this app, a very small team. And here's your team, okay, to make this app for locals in Beijing. Does anybody immediately see any problems? I see a couple of nods. Okay. What's the problem?
Well, you're not from Beijing,
probably. Good. Probably not. They might be, but they might not be from Beijing. And I use this example in some of the classes I teach. And I think it's obvious. Well, I'm going to sell something to Chinese people. I might want some Chinese people on my team. That's kind of common sense, right? Okay. So I did this actually while working on this talk. I actually searched robot engineering team in DuckDuckGo. I'm trying to move away from Google a little bit, just trying that out. And this is the #1 hit of robot engineering team from Google. Not Google image search, DuckDuckGo image search. And what's the problem here?
Well, there's no women.
There's no women. In fact, I found it hard to find a picture of a robot engineering team with female members, and when I did, they're typically for kids, because there's a lot of working with young kids these days. So this is actually really interesting for me, because it is obvious that we should have Chinese people on a team making an app for China. Then why is it okay to have all these engineering teams making robots for the general public? So let's look at some statistics. I actually found it hard to find really current statistics. But here's some ones that I found. In 2011, this is USA. Women made up 20% of programmers, 19% of software engineers, 13% of engineers. And there's signs that it's actually getting worse, not getting better, at least up until that point. The drop in women computer science holders from 2001 to 2009, and there's still signs it's getting worse in Canada. The 2015 CS enrollments in universities in Canada was 12% to 25%, and I'm embarrassed to say that the University of Manitoba, where I am, was at the bottom of that list. Okay, so we're not having many people, so we're not having many women in sciences and engineering compared to men. And then another thing I often hear is, yeah, but the real power shapers are probably doing better, right? What about progressive Silicon Valley? Well, it is a little better. Google, according to some sources, is 70% men, and one of the best is Amazon at 63%. But this is actually a little depressing if this is the best we can do. But this is actually quite interesting. If we have so few women CS degree holders or people in STEM, these companies are doing above average at recruiting. But that kind of makes sense. If they're able to recruit the best talent, you'd imagine they would recruit a bigger share of the female population. But that's a really complicated idea that maybe we can get into later. But the problem is this, and I really want to make this point when I'm talking about gender work in robots. It's bigger than this. It's that when we're designing and building robots that serve or work with the needs of the general public, whether it's in factories or hospitals or research or whatever, it just makes sense, right? That if without a representative team, we may miss important needs, goals, and consideration. So basically, are we really building what people need or want, or things that will work with people? We saw a lot of great examples of this in the prior talk. And I want to point out something that I'll bring up again. We're talking as if this is like, we often talk about women in STEM as the extreme or the exception. I'll come back to that. But they are half the population. Half, right? Okay. So we maybe want to rethink how we're approaching this. So to sum that point, it's just good design practice to have a representative team. That's basics. It's good for business. If you're making a tool that you want people to actually use, or to work with people, to work in a real scenario, you should be thinking about the diversity of your team and of your process for making that tool. You don't have to trust me. There's a plethora, way too many examples actually, of failed products, failed problems. There's book after book going into detail about things that have failed due to lack of representation. I advise you to search online. Here are 3 books that I often give to people. One of these have been getting some media recently. But there's a huge history of a team of primarily male engineers making something that does not work for the female part of the population. When I talk to people about this, especially given that in my field, as I've said, a male-heavy room full of students, you often get a bit of defensiveness. And I want to highlight that I don't think this is usually, and we can find some examples, but it's not usually malicious, right? We're not seeing these Dr. Evils out there, yes, we're keeping the women out of science and technology. And I think it's important to realize that, and that's a gateway for us, especially the men in the audience, going, right, what are my biases, and what have I brought in here? It's not usually malicious, it's just for various reasons where we are, but we have power to change and to move it. I'm going to go through some examples. I've mentioned these books. I'm going to go through some examples here. Did you know that women are more likely to injure themselves with power tools? Did you know that? Can you guess what kind of reaction I get when I say this to a room full of male computer science students? What kind of reaction would anybody want to say it?
Women don't use power tools.
Sorry?
Women don't use power tools.
Women don't use power tools? That's an additional version. Aren't allowed to use? You guys are being nice.
Are we questioning the science of the original study?
Is that a question of the science of the original study? It can't be true. Or women aren't good at power tools. That's kind of silly. You know, you get that kind of reaction. And this is a little informative, so I'm actually quite interested in this. I love my power tools. I'm a do-it-yourselfer, and I love DeWalt. It's an American brand. They make awesome stuff. But it turns out if you look online and read blogs, a lot of women say, my hand doesn't fit. I can't grip it properly. It slips. Okay? And another thing I found is that, again, in searching this, I found that a lot of women in online blogs are saying, yeah, drop the American tools. Get the Makita ones. Any idea why Makita might do better for women?
Asian brand?
It's an Asian brand, it's a Japanese brand.
Smaller hand size.
Smaller hands, right? So you have this drill that's made for people that are on average smaller, which fits the American women better, and they can use it. So I want to make the point here that women might be more likely to injure themselves with power tools, not because they're bad at tools. We do have the cultural issue of whether they're allowed to use it or whether the man of the house protects his tool kingdom. But it's also the physical design characteristics. So bringing this back to robotics, if you're making an interface, or if you're making a tangible tool, or making a robotic arm that someone's grabbing, and your entire team is male, I mean, I'm in Canada, North American male, you might want to think about what that means for the usability for female users or people, just people with smaller hands in general. Another example of this physical problem is the Pebble watch. Anyone here ever own one of these? Was it good?
Not really.
Not really?
I'm afraid it wasn't great.
It wasn't great. One of the primary reasons that I found why it was returned was that it pinches the wrist of people who are smaller. And of course, typically in North America, it's a lot more women are smaller than men, and so a lot of women say this sucks, it pinches my wrist. So again, if you're making a product for the general public and you have a team that has a very narrow diversity, you might be missing out. And this has success implications, right? This has real economic implications. I wouldn't suggest these people were malicious in this, but if you just don't think about it if that's your team. Here's another example. I quite like this example. I really like navigation on my phone, and my wife hates it. She says it's not very useful. I use mine all the time. She's a great navigator, I'm not. These things typically, at least mine, say the following. Turn right in 400 meters, right? Turn west on so-and-so street in 600 meters. But there's research that suggests that male typical navigation is using absolute directions and distances, and yet female typical navigation use landmarks and cues. Now I can say this is true in my family because it is, but you don't take my word for it. There's research on this, and yet these apps almost predominantly use meters and directions. And so again, you might want to be thinking about this in terms of the devices that you're creating. If a device you have is giving information to people, let's say making a robot for a hospital ward that's predominantly run by female nurses, and they complain it's confusing or not very helpful, maybe your interaction paradigm is using male typical things, the way it conveys information. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying if you have an all-male team, the chances of you missing something like this are a lot higher than if you have a diverse team. Here's another one that I often get negative reactions from the undergrads. Women are more likely to be killed in car accidents. Now this example has probably been really famous lately, so many of you have probably seen this. But why would women be more likely to be killed in car accidents? I get a student in my undergrad put their hand up and they say, because women can't drive. Well actually the statistics say young men can't drive. That's, if you want to look at statistics, that's what they are. And the statistics are very clear that women don't cause accidents, they get killed in them. Right? Did you know that until recently the primary crash test dummy was based on the average American male? Okay, so all of this safety testing that's been going on has been protecting the average American male a lot more than other groups. It's been getting better a little more recently. There have been some companies bringing in female crash test dummies, but they do things like put the female in the passenger seat, because of course women shouldn't drive. And also a lot of female crash test dummies are just scaled down versions of the male crash test dummies. Right? Makes sense? Women have different body proportions, different weight distribution. They hit the dashboard differently. Okay? Last example I want to go over here. Heart attacks. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I jumped in. I want to relate this back to your robots. Because if you are doing safety testing with robots, which depending on industry and is required, and if a lot of your early steps of safety testing and working with how quickly it stops if it hits somebody are with your teammates, and they're typically male, this is the kind of thing that might emerge from it. Again, I don't really think people are trying to keep, at least in North America, women from driving. It's just people aren't thinking about it. And that's my optimistic view on this, right? People aren't thinking about it. And if you're going to be doing work with your robots in safety testing, and you're in a typical all-male team or primarily male team, you might be introducing similar biases that could actually have safety implications on the users who will be stuck working next to these robots. Heart attacks more likely to be diagnosed in women. Ooh. Let's fix that. Misdiagnosed. That's backwards. Ooh. Okay, heart attacks much more likely to be misdiagnosed in women than men. This picture of a heart attack is pretty familiar to everybody, right? Right? And it turns out that women are also more likely to die following a heart attack than men are. And there's a lot of reasons behind this, and I'm not a doctor, well, not a real doctor, not a medical doctor. But there's research showing that in the medical community, the data is biased towards male characteristics of heart attacks. So for example, men, the predominant features is chest pain, but in women it's a lot more diverse. In fact, a lot of women get face pain first. Did you know that? Okay, a lot of doctors don't know that. That's terrifying. But the message here is, again, if you're using data, even for medical sciences, if you're using data to make decisions, if you have a robot that's working with people, think about the data and where it's coming from and the gender biases that are built into the data that you're using. And again, we had some awesome examples in the previous talk. Even just thinking about it is the first step towards going, all right, let's just dig into this. Oh, there is a bias. How do we fix it? Okay. I'm going to share a quote by Simone de Beauvoir. I can't, despite being Canadian, I don't speak French, so I probably butchered her name. It's a bit of an aggressive quote, but I quite like it. She said, she's a French philosopher, she said, representation of the world like the world itself is the work of men. They describe it from their own point of view, which they confuse with absolute truth. Now again, aggressive, don't shoot me. But the reason I really like this quote is because I think there's a lot of truth in it if we generalize it. I mean, she had an agenda for very good reasons of what she was trying to do with feminism, and so she was very aggressive. But if we generalize this, I think we get to the crux of the matter. And I've butchered her quote here. Representation of an idea or an artifact, like the world itself, is the work of the team that made it, the team that built it, the team that's working on it. They describe from their own point of view, which they confuse with the absolute truth. And I think that's true here. And it's not malicious. If you're a team of 20-something Canadian men making a device, it's natural for you to think the world is, your worldview is everybody's worldview. Okay, it's natural. And so I think the message I want to make in this point is that it's not necessarily malicious, it's natural for people to do this, but there are dangers associated with it. So if you find yourself in a team that has a lack of gender bias or other diversity bias, it's worth thinking about. So how are we doing as a field? Well, I'm not really a roboticist. I'm in human-robot interaction, and I do a lot of really different things. I've talked about representation on teams, which is not good. In robotics and engineering, STEM in general is not good. But actually, a student of mine did a survey that I want to share briefly with you. This is a bit dated now, but she did a survey of participant pools in the ACM Conference on Human-Robot Interaction from 2006, the first year, to 2013. And she just looked at studies. So from that time period, there were 190 papers with user studies. Out of those, 106 reported gender ratios. So almost half didn't even bother reporting male or female participants. And out of those, only 21 did any kind of gender analysis. Okay? So about 56% reported gender and 11% reported gender analysis. And I want to highlight here, is this going to work? Yeah, nope, it tried, okay. That these people who, the difference here, the 44% who do not report gender ratio, based on what we know about the teams, we can probably assume a more male-heavy bias, because the people that are aware of gender issues who try to balance are the ones reporting it, although I can't prove that, right? But I'm inclined to believe that people that aren't bothering to report are more likely to take lab mates from computer science and engineering who are more male. Within that distribution, we looked at what percentage of female participants. So 25 or 27% actually have a half balance, which is quite nice. And then we have a left tail distribution, so it's still male heavy, but on average, it was 43% female participants, which on first glance is encouraging, but at the same time, we don't even know about the rest of the 44% of the studies. So this is interesting to think about, right? What are our gender balances? Are we reporting them? Or even when we review papers, right? Hey, can you please report the gender? It would be nice to know. So data is really helpful to know, and this links back to what I was talking about earlier. If you're using results from a study, if you're using results from some knowledge, knowing the diversity of the people involved, I'm looking at gender here, but as many dimensions as you can, will help you make informed decisions about how to use that data, okay? What about actual robots? Here's now, male or female? Yeah, I did the same thing. He was like, And I was like the same thing until I brought a good friend of mine and colleague from sociology who's a feminist scholar. She said, it's a boy. So what do you mean it's a robot? It's not a boy. Biceps, shoulder pads, and then when it sat down, it's doing man spread. She's like, it's like that guy sitting next to her on the airplane, you know? It's a boy robot. Okay, who cares? It's a very popular robot. It's very useful. A lot of people use it. Maybe it has features that make people think it's a boy. Okay. What about Pepper? Boy, girl? This is a heated debate in my group, by the way. I can't convince my students of my personal opinions. Well, there's a waist and it's like a skirt. Okay, so I think it's very effeminate. Okay. They claim it's gender neutral. No. But I actually want to share a quote. This is, again, not scientific. I have a student who's working on actually coding some data from a sexism study I'm doing that is not reported yet. But she said to me, Trina is her name, she said, Pepper looks like a female robot, but moves and acts like a man. Okay, that's really interesting. Again, this is a quote, not proof. But this struck me as really interesting. Do we care if our robots look like little boys or girls? And do we care if a robot might look like a robot, move like a man? Who cares? It's just a robot. I'm not worried about that. So I want to share this study, and there's actually quite a few of them now. This is a study by Frederick Eisel and Hegel, and they show that simply by changing the haircut of a robot, people described it with different characteristics. So the male robot was more agentic, had more power, right? The female robot was more communal, good supporting people. The male robot was better for male typical tasks. The female robot was better for female typical tasks, stereotypical, right? And so the point I want to make is, if there are gender things emerging from your robot designs, we can expect people to ascribe gender stereotypes to those robots. And if you don't care, that's fine, but you've just lost control as a robot designer of how people are going to interact with your device, right? So you probably want to be thinking about whether if Pepper does indeed look like a robot, move like a man, as a robot creator, you want to think about, all right, how does that change how people might interact with it? If you don't do that thinking, it's still going to happen, you've just lost control, okay? So I hope I've convinced you that we have a bit of a problem. What can we do about it? So now's a good time to bring up this point that I've had several people ask me when I was telling them about this talk. Why is there some guy out there telling us about underrepresentation of women? Okay, good question. All right, see you later. No, I'm not here. Any ideas?
Well, I think if the stereotypes against women are generated by men or crafted by men for men, then it's a man that has better chances of understanding them and helping fight them.
Okay. I like that answer. It makes me feel good about what I'm doing. There's a couple of points that I want to make. If women are indeed a minority in science, technology, and engineering, we can't expect a minority to defend itself and pick up all the work. In fact, just because a researcher is a woman doesn't mean they care about gender issues, right? That's kind of a funny one to assume. So they just don't care, some of them. So why is it their job to do it? So that's one thing. We can't expect a minority to self-represent all the time. Two, I find it interesting, and I've seen examples in my own work where it matters. And so as a researcher, I think it's an important issue, and so I'm selling this idea to you. But you can beat me up about this later. So what can we do about this? Just try. Just try. Think about it. Try to raise your own awareness. Most of you are not going to go off and take a course and become a feminist scholar or a gender expert. You're not, right? But if you just start thinking about it, you can make inroads. It's a minefield. Every time I do anything about gender, I get beat up. I don't get beat up like this with any rest of my work, but gender, I get beat up. It's a minefield. But you have to try. You're going to screw it up. But when you screw it up, it's an opportunity to learn. So I really like this comment. I took this picture myself. I was reading Calvin Hobbes to my kids. So Calvin says, I no longer wish to be called a boy. And then Hobbes says, isn't that what you are? Yes, but I find the term demeaning and sexist, which is trying to be progressive. Then what do you want to be called then? A chromosomally advantaged youth. And that may not catch on. So in the process of trying to be progressive, Calvin instead highlighted his own gender biases. I thought it was a brilliant comic. From like the 80s, right? It's ahead of its time. But you're going to do this, but mistakes can highlight how you can learn. So I found this very helpful myself. In my own work, I've screwed up and went, and then someone's called me out, and it's uncomfortable, and then later you go, right, actually, they were kind of right. So when you try, you might screw up, but at least it's an opportunity for them. Improve the gender balance in STEM. Sounds easy. I have a colleague working on a recommendations document. You can ask me, it's not published yet. But at least that you can do is in your own team. I've had really good success with recruiting some female students, and I've actually had top grad students say, well, I went to your team because there's some women in it. Right? So for me, it's been a very powerful recruitment tool to get the best of the best who don't want to go to the all-male teams elsewhere. Data. I'm not going to harp on this. We've heard it already. I'm going to hear it again. Just think about your data. If you're running studies, if you're reviewing data, just think about the data you collect, the data you review, and the data that you use. And I'm going to end the talk. I tried to slow down because I misjudged the time, and now I'm soon going over time. But here's a point that's like 101 in design classes, that if you've taken a design class or an HCI class, you've probably seen this. But to design for everyone, you design for extremes. Okay? And I put the star here because it's kind of sad that designing for women is an extreme. But I'll let you think about that. So it comes down to the curb cut effect, which I'm hoping many of you have heard about before. The curb cut effect is this. When it was mandated that for wheelchair access, curbs had to be cut so people weren't stuck, it seems like you're doing this for wheelchair users. But it turns out that it helps so many more people. And there have been follow-up studies showing that perfectly able-bodied people will go quite a ways out of the way to use a curb cut because they don't want to trip or whatever reason. If you've ever pushed a baby stroller, if you've ever had an injury and used crutches, if you've ever had heavy luggage, you enjoy a curb cut. The idea is when you design for these edge cases, you end up helping people, a lot more people, more than you've planned. And there's so many examples of this. Closed captioning, alt text is useful for people in rural communities with slow internet, for example. Email was pioneered by a hard of hearing person with a deaf wife. Well, I scared her away. Just joking.
Oh, no.
I'm joking. I know you have to go.
It's airplane. Thank you for your comment.
Remote control. Who here uses a remote control? Right? Everybody. It wasn't designed for you. It was designed for people with mobility issues, right? So that's a curb cut effect. In summary, STEM is heavily male biased, and this can result in blind spots and mistakes that hurt your success in adoption of a robot or tool. And people might apply gender stereotypes to machines, even if you didn't design for it, changing how they adopt and use them. So you might want to start thinking about that. So all I can say is try to sensitize yourself, note gender balance, and learn a bit about it, and you'll be surprised at how quickly you'll start seeing it everywhere. So thank you very much. I have some time for questions.
Thank you very much. So, no question?
I said it's a minefield, right?
I have a comment or two. So when you mentioned about the crash test dummies, I quickly looked up the technical specification 15066. Is that familiar to anyone? It's a technical specification which is made by members of the robotics community, so probably a lot of people here at ICRA and from industry, mandating how robots should interact with humans in industrial scenarios. So
Okay.
it's like the precursor to an ISO standard. And I never noticed this before, but there's an image of the human body and the permissible forces which you can apply to the human body, and of course it's male.
Is it only male there?
Well, I guess it could be a little androgynous if you, use imagination, but it's
Okay.
it's mostly male, and also there's no. I guess there are areas of the human body where the permissible pressure should be gender specific.
Absolutely.
Thinking like the chest area, so
Or even different parts of the
or the
abdomen.
hips, or something. So this isn't anywhere in the document.
Could you send me this, please? By email? I'd like to, because I'm not going to remember the details of what you, the specific specification. I'd love to have that example in my repertoire. If you can email me, that'd be fantastic.
It's an illegal copy, but I can.
Even that, I can get my own copy if you just want to point me to the name of the page. You don't have to send me the copy.
And I have not comment, but maybe someone else.
I think in gender there's another issue that
Can you
gender
be a bit
is-
louder, Martin? Sorry.
So gender is not binary, right?
Yes.
It's a spectrum, and that's a problem that can come up, that can be harmful. Like you can do a study in HRI, and you compare men to women, but that can be harmful in the way that you're representing gender to the people that don't fit these two categories. And on top of this, if we want to be representative and we want to find people of all genders, this makes it very difficult to find subjects for your experiments. So how do you trade off the harms that come from like not finding the diversity that you need, but also doing the study on the specific focus that you want?
That's a great question. In all of my studies, we put your self-identified gender, male, female, intersex, and give them an option to specify. We've never had a person, and I just recently did it for a grant, 1,500 participants, and never a person that's self-identified. And so, like you said, it's really hard to get that data. I don't know. I don't have a smart thing to say about it, but it's a really big issue, especially with transgender people or people that have sensitivity to being identified a certain way. How do you handle that? And that's a really good question. My personal approach is to accept that I'm going to screw some things up. But I think it's better to try and move forward and learn as we go, is my personal approach, than staying with the status quo. So I'm open to, if I ever have a participant come talk to me about how that bothered them, that would be a fantastic learning opportunity for me. But I don't have a smart way, like you said, because with 1,500 people, the fact that no one checked that box just tells me that no one's bothering, right? They're just putting I don't want to get into it. And so I don't know how to address that.
You had, okay. I don't know, you choose. Please, that's better.
So regarding like having more women into science, I think we should all be working on that, because from what I've seen, so I think we should all be going to schools and promote women getting into science, because for example, I've been checking data from math competitions for teenagers for over years, and what happens is that when they are 14, around half the competitors are women. But when they turn 18, the competitors are like 10 to 20% women. So there is a point between this age where they just lose interest in science. Many women
Or lose interest in competition, in a competitive approach to it.
I don't know.
And there's some evidence for that too. I
There's
know.
something happening in that age that makes women less likely to get into science. And so I think we should all promote science at that specific age, because this is when they are going to decide what to do with their life in the future. And I think that that would be our effort. It should be our effort to like promote women to get into
There's a lot of really good resources on learning about how to do that. In this specific example, I've been trying, my own department has a lot of programming contests, a lot of them sponsored by the ACM. I personally hated programming contests. I'm not competitive, at least publicly. I don't like that. But there's work showing that if you, instead of having a programming contest, have a maker fair or a creativity day, where you're just making something because you're trying to have fun and be cool instead of competing, you might get more female students coming out. So you get those kinds of changes can be very useful.
Yeah, I guess so. But also there must be some kind of like something going to like probably the TV shows and like portraying women as like not scientific profiles that make women decide not to take the scientific field as their expertise in the future.
Well, it's also a chicken and egg problem. So I often
Yeah.
teach first year computer science. And at my school, we typically have classrooms of 150 to 200, and there's 5 or 6 sections. And one of the things I do is, at the end of the term, the top 10 people, students, I'll email them and say, hey, you're the top 10 of the class, good job, you're going into computer science. You know, good for you. And I found that really helps, they feel good about themselves. Out of those top 10, typically 8 are female. And in my case, so it's strange that they don't, they don't go into it. So I've started bringing them in for short meetings and ask about it, and you hear things like, yeah, well, I don't belong. I've looked in a 3rd year course, and it's all boys, or they're all kind of gross, and typical computer science stereotypes come out. And so it's a hard cultural problem.
Maybe those like 15% that get into science are the ones that really are outstanding, but we are missing many more in the way.
We're losing a lot of outstanding people who just don't want to be bothered with the problems.
I was just sort of thinking out loud over the power tool problem, because it's a personal problem, for me in many cases. And one thing is, if my hands are smaller than the hands of men, but the producers of power tools, what they say is, I cannot, have 4 different lines for all these things. I have to go with the majority. And the current situation is that, there's more men using power tools than women. So isn't it like a sort of a, the reality produces the stereotype, and the stereotype enforces the...
Yeah, so if you're in a company meeting, and your market analysis shows that 95%, I'm making these numbers up of course, but 95% of your customers are men, you're just not going to care, you're going to make money. You're going to try to make money, make the best one. I think my counter argument is not to make pink versus blue drills, because that these days in social media does not go over well. Big Doritos for women and stuff like this. But my personal opinion is, if you design for these edge cases, there must be, if you're a clever designer, if you're the company that comes up with the drill that's comfortable for both small and big hands, you've won. Because you've kept the male market happy, the typical male market happy. You've now kept the small male market happy. You can perhaps export more to Asia, and you've kept the female market happy. So I'm not ready to give up on this idea of finding a solution that fits, designed for the extreme cases, so everyone can fit it. I know cameras have grips that you can slip on to make them bigger or smaller, for example. Is that it would cost them pennies to include a grip sleeve to make the drill. I'm brainstorming, right? That's, I think, is a solution. Not that we should design for a 2% market, because it's not worth it. You would never win that argument financially. But if you design for the extreme cases, it's going to work for so many more people. I think we're out of time. Good.
I think we are in a coffee break, but I don't want to stop people. I mean,
If we're okay, I'm happy to keep talking.
Yeah, I was just thinking when I heard what the person here said, both are programs like cycles that are difficult to break, and for me, there's a solution that I don't think is perfect, but I wonder what you think about it, about positive discrimination, which breaks the cycle for temporarily at least until it comes back into some more balanced equilibrium. I don't know what you think about
I didn't catch the keyword there. Which
positive discrimination.
positive discrimination? Yeah. So we will see this with legal things. You'll have laws that come in and say you have to do this or that thing. I'm a bit of a realist. You know, we can have all of our high-level ideas that we want, but a company wants. I understand that companies and producers and startups want things that work today. So it's not mandated for everybody. It's a hard sell unless. This is why I like the curb cut argument so much, because you argue, look, there's a small segment that we can include without hurting the rest of them. And then, yeah, so I think positive discrimination, if I understand what you mean in that regard.
At university, for example.
Sorry?
At university, for example.
I think a PhD student.
Affirmative
Affirmative action.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, because I wouldn't say that I do affirmative action in my lab, but I would say that I'm cognizant of the fact that female students are rated more harshly. There's research on this than male students. I'm aware of this fact, and I've leveraged that to get strong students that might not rank so highly somewhere else simply because of their gender, right? Yeah, so in my team I've done that, and it's snowballed. Like, at one point this summer I'm going to have 2 male students and 10 female students. I have the opposite problem, right? I'm just, no, I want balance. But it snowballs, and students have said to me, I have pictures on my website. Oh, you have female students, you have women. I'm not going to be the only one. I've had multiple students say that to me. That's really terrifying. The fact that this is a reality. So I'm a fan of affirmative action and positive bias. I think it can be a hard sell to people who are just thinking of bottom lines, and so finding clever angles to, because I think these things have positive outcomes in many ways, like I've just described. Those are the arguments to make, I think, that'll resonate with people that can change things. But that's just my own take.
It's time for coffee, I guess. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Please, back here at 3:30, we have 2 more designing talks. So